Psychedelics Today is excited to announce we are the premier partner of the Remind Psychedelics Business Forum, a 2-day conference and networking event happening November 28th and 29th at the Westgate Las Vegas Resort and Casino in partnership with MJ BizCon. The forum brings together entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, policymakers, and healthcare professionals at the forefront of this rapidly evolving industry. Psychedelics Today founder Joe Moore will be presenting alongside an incredible lineup of speakers such as Courtney Barnes, Ariel Clark, Amanda Ryman, Josh Hardman, and many more. Registration includes breakfast, lunch, coffee break, and a networking reception. And I heard such great things about Remind last year that I'm making sure to personally be there, so I hope to see you in Vegas. Visit remindmedia.com and you can use code REM, R-E-M, Psych, P-S-Y-C today for 10% off your registration.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's Joe here. Just wanted to let you know about an upcoming class we have going in Denver. We're actually producing a Navigating Psychedelics 2-day edition for all of you out there that want some in-person ed. So we just ran it in Miami and it was an amazing success. And we're going to do it again in Denver on November 10 and 11. And we would love to have you there. If you want to learn about it, psychedelicstoday.com/events. We are going to run through 2 days of material. We're actually even going to give you an impressive breathwork experience that hopefully helps you understand that experience and how it's useful. So anyway, go over to psychedelicstoday.com/events to learn more, and we would love to see you there in Denver.
Every year, psychedelics are becoming more accepted into mainstream culture, and people all over the world are asking themselves, how can I get the skills, foundations, and tools to build a meaningful career in psychedelics? Well, that is exactly where Vital comes in. Our 12-month interdisciplinary practitioner training program is robust, inclusive, and most of all transformative, both personally and professionally. Our graduates have gone on to do many different things in the psychedelic space, like working at ketamine clinics, consulting on clinical trials, opening a retreat center, starting their own coaching or wellness practice, and even launching a psychedelic media and merchandise platform, and so much more. Classes start January 23rd, and our application deadline is December the 20th. But if you apply and enroll before November the 19th, you'll save $750 from tuition. Head to vitalpsychedelictraining.com to download our full course curriculum. You can also check out our events page at psychedelictoday.com to sign up for an upcoming Q&A session or to join an expert-led topical taster webinar. Find out whether Vital is the transformative journey you've been looking for.
Today on the podcast, you're going to hear about some tough topics relative to the current war in Israel and Palestine. Our host, David Drapkin, recorded live from Israel, and he and the guests shared some of their thoughts around the conflict, their positions, and the struggle they've personally endured since the war began last week. The episode was scheduled before the war began, and our intention was to share news with all of you related to a psychedelic conference in Tel Aviv. Although the circumstances in Israel have changed since then, we ultimately decided that sharing these types of discussions is consistent with our mission. We want to offer a disclaimer to you before listening. We know many of our listeners have been affected by the war, both directly and indirectly, and there are a lot of strong feelings about the conflict, so please take care while listening to this episode. We also want to take this opportunity to clarify that Psychedelics Today has chosen to not take an official position on the conflict because we acknowledge there is too much about the situation we do not understand. However, we stand by in love and support, holding space for David, a crucial member of our team who is currently living with his family in Israel. We speak with David daily and want nothing more than safety and security for him, his family, and for the war to end soon. And finally, we wanted to share a bit about our values and our purpose. We are proud to offer a platform for many voices, one that provides storytelling and commentary on the power and potential of psychedelics, and believe our work serves an important purpose for humanity today, the healing of the world. We also stand for planetary health and resilience, for freedom and for equality. And as such, if we have any message to share with you all, it's that now is a time to practice compassion for others and holding space for anyone who may be suffering as a result of this conflict, including, and perhaps most importantly, ourselves. Take care, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Psychedelics Today. This is David Drapkin, your host, having a conversation with Katrin Preller and Michael Mithoefer. So both of them will be some of the keynote speakers at Psychedelic Medicine conference in Israel. So we were talking about that conference and their work. And really, I wanted to also just get a bit personal. I'm living in Israel now. I've been here 7 weeks or so. And the last couple of weeks for me have been, horrific. I think the whole world is going through a very deep transition or process, questioning, and it's painful to see what's been going on. So for me personally, my life has kind of been turned upside down. My social media feed is filled with people with photographs who have been killed or kidnapped. My telephone is kind of flashing the whole time with an app that I've got warning me about missiles coming towards me. It's just a new reality that I'm living in. So it's tough times. And obviously we really hope that things in Israel, Gaza, beyond settle down, that there can be a way forwards through this, in and through. And the Psychedelic Medicine conference in Tel Aviv in December, that we all get to be there. So that's our hope. And the conversation with Katrin and Michael, we're kind of feeling into that space of where we are now and where we hope to be. It very much feels like a psychedelic conversation that we kind of need to be having around. And if you didn't hear about the massacre of attendees to a party in Israel in the south called Nova Rave, then I would welcome you to check out a website called novasupport.org, which is pulling together a team of 300 psychedelic-informed practitioners to provide some very intensive therapy to the 3,000 people that survived that massacre in the south of Israel. So if you want to donate or at least spread the word, that would be awesome. Okay, so this conversation with Katrin and Michael is, frontlining their work. Michael in the field of MDMA-assisted therapy, and he's talking about the phase 3B results that came out recently. And Katrin talking about her work with neuroimaging and biomarkers, mechanisms of action, and particularly her work with psilocybin for alcohol use disorder. Awesome to hear kind of where they're holding their respective fields, and Michael talking about, what is he going to do now that kind of MDMA is almost at the finish line with his life. And it was great to hear them talk about integration, how they both feel how important that is and how under-researched it is. Katrin also made an interesting point about neuroplasticity, that the research does not prove that is a kind of fundamental experience or outcome of using psychedelics. So that was great. And just the two of them, they've got totally different disciplines and fields, and it was great to, in a sense, play around with kind of their knowledge systems and see kind of what's stuck. So really cool to just bring that together. And that's obviously what the conference is about in Tel Aviv, that we hope to be there. So it's an amazing, amazing list of speakers. The science program for those 3.5 days in Tel Aviv, it looks incredible. I'm actually going to be one of the speakers, hopefully. So I'm doing a talk called Nurturing Psychedelic Education and Training, Exploring Challenges in a New Complex and Stigmatized Field. So I'll be talking with Osnat Arbel, Hamudal Sharabi, and Pini Balmal. So we'd love to see you there, of course. We're going to have a table. We are one of the sponsors. And please God, this conference is going to be amazing and just what we need. Bringing people together from all around the world to talk about how do we make psychedelic-assisted therapy accessible to all. So really hope to see a lot of you in Tel Aviv in December. All right, so if you haven't liked or subscribed to us yet, please go ahead and do so. We are on all social media platforms, and you can like our podcast too. Any feedback or questions, it's info@psychedelicstoday.com. Our main website for all of our podcasts, articles, events, psychedelicstoday.com. And our training website is psychedeliceducationcenter.com. All right, that was a long intro. Enjoy the show, everyone. God bless.
Hello, everyone. Minesh Gurn, aka the Psychedelic Scientist here, letting you know about a scheduling change for the second cohort of our 8-week live-taught online course, Psychedelic Neuroscience Demystified, How Psychedelics Alter Consciousness and Produce Therapeutic Effects. This course is now starting on November 1st, so you've still got some time to enroll. The course consists of a combination of live group classes and in-depth video lectures, which will give you a solid understanding of the key concepts and findings in psychedelic neuroscience. You'll also have ample opportunity to connect with like-minded peers to discuss all of the content. We make things as accessible and relevant as possible by highlighting real-world practical applications and building from the basic to the more complex. So whether you're a mental health professional, researcher, or just interested in expanding your knowledge, this course will provide you with a deeper understanding of the neuroscience of psychedelics. Classes start on November 1st, and you can find out more information and enroll at psychedeliceducationcenter.com.
Hi, everybody. This is David on another Psychedelic Today podcast, this time with Katrin Preller and Michael Mithoefer. Thanks for joining us, everybody. It's a bit of a special episode because we're particularly talking about the Psychedelic Medicine conference that is scheduled for Tel Aviv in December, where I am on the schedule to be talking about psychedelic training, and Katrin and Michael are also on the schedule to be there. And obviously, we're recording this on the 12th of October, and I'm literally in my bomb shelter right now, so it feels kind of weird to be talking about this, but also really important to have this conversation about the work that we're doing and what the conference means to us and to the world. So, with that being said, Katrin and Michael, welcome. It's really good having you on the show. Michael, you've been on the show before a couple of years back, but I think, Katrin, this is your first time. So maybe, Katrin, I'll ask you, whereabouts are you in the world, and what's happening in your life at the moment?
Thank you. Yeah, you're meeting me in Zurich, in Switzerland. And what's happening here is, of course, we're very closely watching what's happening in Israel. And of course, we're all with the people in Israel, and it's absolutely terrible and devastating. Of course, still hoping that we can share the research and meet the people in December.
Yeah, please God, can't wait. That's something I really hope can happen. The scientific agenda, the itinerary for the 3.5 days just got released yesterday. So yeah, it's just an amazing list of, I think 100 odd people. It looks incredible. So I really, hope it can still happen. And that's what we're all kind of praying for, really, that things go in a certain way that we can all meet and be there. How are you feeling about it, Michael? And where are you in the world?
I'm in Charleston, South Carolina right now. Like Katrin, and you for sure, I'm finding it challenging to focus on other things other than what the tragedy that's happening in Israel and Gaza. And so, in a way, it's hard to think about conferences and things like that at this moment. On the other hand, it seems maybe even more important that we keep our focus on learning how to better help people with trauma, because obviously that's a huge need. So on one hand, I'm grateful that at least we can be doing something. Our dear friends and colleagues and fellow MAPS researchers and trainers are right now down in southern Israel trying to help people with the trauma down there. So anything we can do to support the efforts in Israel and is to the good. So I hope this conference can go forward, because it's such an important topic. How do we help each other heal? And as Rick Doblin has said, he has a vision for zero net trauma by 2035, I think he says. So, trauma is not going to stop, but hopefully we can keep up with the pace and helping people. So thanks for this opportunity, David. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to emphasize that there is so much trauma already that we're kind of seeing increasing, and so much mental health and addiction challenges that we've got, and environmental challenges that itself causes mental health conditions to worsen. And so the more that we can know how to help people, the better. And I think the two of you are quite different researchers and practitioners, and so it's great that from your own disciplines, you're really being able to bring to the conference and just to the world, what do we know so far? Like, what questions have we answered and what questions haven't we answered? And maybe just to ask the first question, Michael, I'm just want to say congratulations, even though MDMA has still not yet kind of passed the FDA test. That's still pending, I think, for next year, but it's so much work over many decades and we're in the final mile. So can you just talk us through How's it feeling, maybe personally, and then how's it feeling kind of, professionally, to be at this stage with the kind of phase 3B results having been published very recently?
Yeah, thanks. It's very gratifying, after all these decades of work on this, and as you know, our with Rick Doblin's been working on getting this research done for even longer than we have. But Annie and my wife Annie and I started in 2000, working on the first phase 2 trials, and which finally started in 2004. So after the series of phase 2, and then now our second phase 3 trial showing very strong results and confirming, a confirmatory trial to our pivotal phase 3 trial showing, very strong effect sizes for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. So that's what we've been working toward all these years. And now, as you say, we don't know what the FDA is going to decide, but the new drug application should be going in from MAPS Public Benefit Corporation in the next couple months. So we're expecting a decision by FDA next year, which I'm very optimistic about, given our strong results. So it feels like, well, in my life, kind of an end of an era. Annie and I have been so absorbed in this work, which has been a wonderful privilege for all these years. That we're right down now. We're actually packing up a lot of the stuff in the research office, closing down the research office so it can go back to being a clinical office. So it feels quite poignant, and also it's become, many of these years we've been thinking that this was the finish line. Having 2 successful phase 3 trials would be job done. Now we've realized in recent years there's a whole huge additional job, is how do we get this treatment to the people that need it in an equitable way, in a cost-effective way, without losing the heart of the treatment. So it's a whole new challenge, but a exciting one.
Yeah, and I'd love to dip into that. I just want to ask you, Michael, are you planning on being a MDMA-assisted therapist in the real world outside of clinical trials?
People have been asking me that. I'll be 77 next week. So part of my goal is to have more time with grandchildren and other things, but it's going to be pretty hard to resist the opportunity to work with some more people with MDMA if it's approved. So I don't know. Knowing myself,
I'm hoping
I probably will.
If I may ask you a question, Michael, so how do you envision MDMA-assisted therapy in the real world? So what is your vision, how this will look after FDA will hopefully have approved MDMA as medication?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a lot more to learn to answer that question, in a very complete way. My vision is that if MDMA is approved, I think the demand is going to be greater than our capacity to meet it at first, because I think the therapy, this is about MDMA-assisted therapy, so it requires more people to do it, more trained people, and I think the training is very important, because it can appear deceptively simple, and it can be very complicated and challenging. So I think we need to be really creative about, for one thing, make sure people can access the treatment regardless of their ability to pay. And that's going to be a whole challenge. There's a lot of work going on. There's now an insurance code approved by the AMA for psychedelic assisted therapy, which should apply to psilocybin and MDMA and others. So that's one step in that direction. But I think we're hoping to start a group study soon. And Chris Stauffer in Portland, Oregon, has a protocol that hopefully will start soon. So we need to find ways to make it increase the cost effectiveness or the efficiency without losing the human connection and the inclusion of robust therapy in the process. So it's a big challenge. But in the research, we've done everything we could think of to increase the chances of safety and success and efficacy. So we couldn't individualize. So I think part of it will be figuring out some people may need even more support than they had in the research, but some people may be able to do it in a more streamlined way, and also groups and things like that. So I think we need to be really creative about how to do it, and also resist the pressures of, you know, minimizing the therapy and the human connection in favor of speed. So that I think that's a big challenge.
Michael, you were talking about the importance of therapy. Is MAPS planning to have a label where it says MDMA-assisted therapy, or are you filing for MDMA as approval as medicine on itself?
No, we're filing for MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD. So it's an unusual concept for the FDA, but I think they understand over these years of reviewing our protocols. I think they understand that it is about catalyzing the therapy.
And I think especially just having the therapy on the label reinforces that the two go together, they're conjoined, and that addresses some of your concerns, Michael, around that we might try and rush through this and just focus on the medication side, whereas the therapy and is hugely important.
I hope so. Of course, I want to emphasize we don't know what the label is going to say, but that is the indication that we have in mind that the MAPS public benefit is hoping for.
Yeah, it's always hard to talk about the work of MAPS because it's always kind of potential and provisional, and there's loads of disclaimers you have to say. So it would be lovely to be able to talk about it openly without all of these little kind of footnotes on the bottom.
Yeah. Yes.
Katrin, I wanted to ask you about some of your work around, I guess, the neuroscience of it, psychiatry, neuroimaging. Have you looked much at trauma or PTSD? Because I know you've done a lot of work with addiction, and obviously trauma has a huge kind of comorbidity with addiction. So have you looked at the kind of mechanisms of action, kind of the neurological patterns of trauma?
Yeah, unfortunately, not so far. As you are certainly aware of, psilocybin-assisted therapy has so far not focused on PTSD or trauma-related illnesses. So the clinical trials that we have been doing were in depression and in alcohol use disorder. With the depression trial already being published, but the alcohol use disorder trial is still in analysis at this time. So I don't know the results yet, unfortunately. That said, as you mentioned, of course, all these illnesses often come with comorbidities like trauma in the past. So there is an element for sure where these people are impacted by trauma. But we haven't been able to look at that specifically yet. But just looking at the mechanistic side of things. So, for example, we do see that psilocybin acutely reduces amygdala reactivity. So that may be something that catalyzes trauma-related processing, right? So I do think that there is a chance that psilocybin may also have an impact on PTSD or other trauma related suffering, but it has not been tested specifically yet.
And why psilocybin and why alcohol use disorder and why the two of those match together for that main research you've been working on lately?
Yeah, so of course we are standing on the shoulder of giants as always, and we are lucky enough to have older data that were collected in the 50s, where we have results that LSD has been shown to be effective for alcohol use disorder. But we also have more recent clinical data showing us that psilocybin is effective for alcohol use disorder, collected by Michael Bogenschutz. So it does make sense to follow up on these data that were already collected. What we are doing in our study is we are not looking at reductions in alcohol use. We are looking at preventing relapse after alcohol withdrawal. So we're basically extending the way that psilocybin is used in addiction disorders. And yeah, we'll see whether that works out or not.
Mm. And have you done any research, or have you been following any research around other psychedelic compounds for addiction? Because I know there's, some folks have used MDMA and ketamine, and I think mescaline is being used in clinical research. Have you kept an eye on it, or any of those other compounds?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely followed the literature, and it seems like ketamine, especially in combination with therapy again, also seems to hold promise in that area. However, as with psilocybin, it's not well characterized yet, right? So we are not as far along as we are with MDMA, where we have these big phase 3 trials. Quite the contrary, we're looking at very small studies at that point, with all these different compounds, where it's really hard to tell whether the results that we see so far, which are mostly positive, really generalize to broader populations, to larger trials, etc. So I think with the classic psychedelics at this point, we still need to be a bit careful when we're talking about clinical efficacy. So evidence is, of course, accumulating, but I don't think we have characterized the space well enough to draw very, very firm conclusions at this point.
Yeah, really is early days. I think you said that, Michael. You've been working towards this goal, of FDA approval, but it's just beginning now, particularly with real world kind of implementation. Maybe I can just ask Michael around the therapeutic protocols that you've developed for the MDMA-assisted therapy. How did you kind of frame that? And I guess there wasn't that much to build it upon, or maybe there was, but how did you approach that subject of developing the clinical protocol and then the training manual to kind of go with it? What was informing that, and whose assistance did you call in to build those?
Yeah, I'd be happy. Can I make a comment on the early days comment?
Yeah.
And what Katrin was just talking about? Because I think, there's a paradox. There are several paradoxes here. And I think it's early. I think I try to remember it's early days in the whole field of psychiatry and neuroscience, understanding what the hell is going on. Our understanding is very limited in so many ways. Our diagnostic system is not really referring to actual diseases. We don't have that level of understanding. The DSM is our attempt to organize our thinking in a way so we can do research and try to discover more. So that, I think that's kind of why, as Katrin was saying, there's evidence that MDMA, that psilocybin may be effective for PTSD. Same with ketamine. We have data about depression with MDMA. Ben Sessa has data about alcohol use with MDMA. So I think this is really pointing us to the limitations of our understanding, why it's so important to not lose sight of how much we have to learn about just the nature of human suffering and healing, really. So it's exciting, because one of the paradoxes to me is Stan Grof, who was one of the premier psychedelic researchers with LSD, and one of our teachers. He says these are all non-specific activators that give access to certain realms of consciousness. I think there's a lot of truth to that. At the same time, there's obviously a lot of difference in the effects of these drugs in the body and the brain. So I think we need to hold this paradox and learn as much as we can about both, and not kind of be reductionist about pretending we understand more than we do, which I know is also Katrin's point of view. So I just find that really part of the excitement, but also part of the challenge. So thanks for thanks for letting me. I've been trying to emphasize that lately. I mean, many others have too, because as we're facing possible approval of a number of these medicines, um, it becomes all more important that we keep an open mind and keep learning, um, rather than just get fixated on treating this or that. We need to do both. So, thanks. Yeah, as far as the treatment protocol, well, we had a big advantage when I had my first conversation with Rick Doblin in 2000, and we just agreed to start working on the MDMA PTSD protocol. We had a new, investigational new drug number, but we also had a history of a lot of use of this same new drug. And so we were able to, as far as the um, dosing range and the frequency, we had some idea from previous, legal clinical use before it was illegal. But no controlled trials. So that was a big advantage. We kind of knew what the likely dosage range was. We tested a range of doses from 25 to 150 of MDMA, but we knew where to start. We started with 125, which turns out, people had worked out from previous clinical use what that was. So, and the approach we learned really, Andy and I both trained with Stan Groff, not using LSD, but in the holotropic breath work, which is an approach to supporting people in these non-ordinary states that he learned from the people he was giving LSD to. He says they taught him what was needed. So we already had this idea of not being overly directive, of trusting the person's inner capacity, what Stan Groff calls now he's most recently referred to as a self-healing capacity, which to me is kind of similar to the body's ability to heal wounds and heal cancer if you create the right conditions. So we already had that concept, and Annie and I had done breathwork groups for 10 years as kind of along with our clinical practice in psychiatry. So we already had that model of trusting that, although sometimes direction from the therapist is certainly needed and helpful, in general, if you don't want to be too directive about it in order to give an opportunity for the person's own healing experience to arise. So we had a big advantage, and we'd already been taught that by Stan, and we already knew the approximate dosage range. So we really designed the protocol along those lines within what's practical to run a clinical trial. So that's how we arrived. First, we had 2 sessions because we didn't know if FDA would even give us permission for any. But then, as we got into the first study, we were able to get permission for a 3rd session. So that's how we arrived at the 3-session model, about a month between. As you know, MDMA is only administered 3 times in all-day sessions with 2 therapists. And then there's a big emphasis on preparation sessions beforehand and integration sessions afterwards. So when we arrived at when we had our good results with our first phase 2 trial, then we didn't have a manual then. I had written a description of our therapeutic approach as appendix to the protocol. And my only reference for that was Stan Groff, LSD psychotherapy page, whatever, referring to his model of the therapy. But then when we had a successful trial, we realized, well, if we're going to replicate this, see if other people can replicate it, we're going to have a treatment manual to describe what we're doing. And frankly, at first I thought, how can you have a treatment manual for this approach? It's too variable, it's too flexible. But I kept coming back to the fact that we needed to have a manual. So we finally decided, well, we should be able to coherently describe what we think we're doing. So that's what we set out to do. And then we worked with a friend, someone who became a friend, a psychologist named June May Roos. And we spent 2 different marathon weeks with her watching videos of our sessions. We had the skeleton of the manual, and then we'd watch those with June. It was kind of mortifying at times. and see what we were doing, and then try to pick out examples and flesh out the manual with examples from what we were doing. So we kind of reverse engineered the manual, I guess. We did it first, and we tried to describe what we were doing. And of course, others have contributed since, and we've tried to refine it with experience. But that's really how the manual came to be.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear, because I've heard of people involved in the trials doing kind of ratings of the fidelity of the manual and the protocol being used with the patients in the trial. But now that you're saying that actually the protocol and manual came from the actual phase 2 experiences, and we were watching those videos, it's beautiful that there's that kind of reciprocal relationship there, kind of basing your model on what you were seeing, and then having ratings to really prove that out. And I want to do a bit of back and forth now with Katrin to talk about the work that you are doing, particularly around the brain. Do you have a sense of any fundamental overarching truths that point to being this is the most important mechanism that we know of for all psychedelic treatments? Like, is there anything right now that you can say, this is the best thing that we've got, like this theory? And is it the 5-HT2A receptor, for example, that can explain healing of different conditions with different compounds? Are we there yet where we can just simply hypothesize that level yet?
Yeah, I wish I had this big round tooth. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone has at this point, right? So, we are evaluating a number of different hypotheses that are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? So we are looking at the brain in terms of molecular mechanisms, like is there a change that we see on the receptor level that may explain a long-term therapeutic effect. Then, of course, we're looking at the more systems level brain level where we are, excuse me. So the systems brain level where we are looking at brain connectivity and changes that may occur in the acute psychedelic induced state, but also that may change over time. So yeah, brain activity, like for example, what I was referring to earlier, like does the brain react differently to stimuli from the environment or changes in the functional architecture over time. But of course, we are also looking at other cognitive or emotional processes that may change over time. So a lot of my work has been on, connection and social cognition. So do people connect better, easier with the environment after they have had a psychedelic experience? Does this, potential increased connection that is reported by people, does this translate into altruistic behavior, or does it translate into maybe even getting more social support, which may be particularly relevant when we're talking about the psychiatric patients who often show social withdrawal and lose contact with their social environment. There's also, of course, other things like, well, what's happening during the session? Are the people getting some insight into potential dysfunctional patterns in their life that may help them, get better eventually? So we're really looking at a lot of different potential mechanisms that may support these changes that patients are experiencing. But I can't give you like my favorite hypothesis right now, because honestly, at this point, I think none of those are really well understood. Especially, we're lacking a lot of long-term studies. We're starting to get an understanding about the acute effects of these drugs, but how these acute effects really translate into long-term improvement of symptoms, we simply do not know at this point. So I think we should start, doing more mechanistic studies that also look at long-term effects, trying to figure out what it is that eventually helps people get better and at what level. And as I'm saying, like, I don't think any of this is really mutually exclusive, right? So you can have insight, you can feel increased social connection, But this may still have something to do with what's happening in your brain, right? So, but I think it's really important to figure that out and to see whether there are, first of all, these transdiagnostic implications. So because we're not talking about a single indication, we're talking about potentially substance use disorders, we're talking about depression, potentially PTSD, maybe OCD. So there seems to be something that is transdiagnostically effective. And I think if that is the only thing that comes from this type of research, if we find this transdiagnostic mechanism of action, that would be incredibly valuable to advance psychiatry. And then the other thing is there seems to be something common, as you said, across LSD, psilocybin, but also pharmacologically different substances like ketamine and MDMA. And right now, I don't think we have a good grasp on what's going on there. So what is different, what is similar across these substances? And so we have more recently started to do studies where we're directly comparing the effects of, for example, LSD, psilocybin, or in a new study also psilocybin and MDMA, and comparing this to other amphetamines without or with lesser degree of serotonergic effects like methylphenidate, also known as Ritalin, for example. And I think these types of studies are really needed, because if we're looking at things in isolation here, we never know if we're looking at a very unspecific effect or whether we're actually looking at something that ends up underlying the therapeutic effect.
Beautiful. That was an awesome answer. I don't know if Michael wants to add anything there, but
Well, yeah, I think it's it's really always heartening and interesting to hear neuroscientists also keeping that broad perspective, that when they see the reality. My understanding of the neuroscience is certainly much superficial compared to Katrin's, but I found it fascinating to watch. I feel like I'm in the clinical space, and then I get to see this information that comes from the neuroscientists, and it's been the things that attract my attention are the ones that correlate so well with what we see clinically. So first we were thinking, okay, the amygdala is turned down, the prefrontal cortex is turned up. That makes sense. Fear is down. People can process their trauma in a more effective way. That fits with what we see in the sessions. And then things like, then obviously the default mode network and the way that networks interact, Robin Carhart Harris's theory of relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, where some people can get out of that rut and suddenly have a new experience. That fits so well with what we see. And then Gould Dolan's recent things about opening a social reward learning network, like you're saying, Katrin, the social learning, that seems to fit incredibly well with what we see clinically. So it's really exciting to see how, the clinical work and the neuroscience are progressing in parallel. And I think the transdiagnostic model that you're talking about makes so much sense to me. We have a paper hopefully coming out soon. Bessel van der Kolk is the first author of the exploratory measures we did in phase 3. And what we saw was robust increases in self-efficacy measures, like self-compassion, huge improvements in self-compassion and decreases in alexithymia, more being able to be more in touch with emotions, things like that. I think that's a really exciting thing to explore, and would explain why we're seeing these things effective across different DSM diagnoses. So yeah, I think it's really cool the way they're moving forward together.
yeah, it's awesome. I'm just doing a thought experiment in my head, blending together your kind of professional worlds. Imagine if a client had, as part of their kind of in-depth biopsychosocial spiritual assessment at the beginning of treatment, if they all had a brain scan and maybe a genetic test as well, checking out biomarkers, looking at impacts of trauma potentially on their brain, and then that could inform how many therapy sessions you might need, what kinds of therapy you use. Is it more CBT or EMDR focused? what medicine do you need to use, how many treatments, how much integration. And I think, wouldn't that be wonderful? It would be quite expensive, but I know for antidepressants now, there's quite a few people that are getting the genetic test because 50% of the time antidepressants aren't that effective, or they have to try another one. So, and particularly because psychedelic therapy is going to be really expensive, maybe there is an argument there to be made in the assessment stage to actually put more money into the screening side and the kind of the biomarkers and doing some deeper assessment just to make sure that the actual protocol that's being used is ideally matched, and maybe even the outcome measures need to be different for each client as well.
Yeah, maybe it would be less expensive, because the normal state of affairs in psychiatry, like educated guessing, basically. Try one thing, if it doesn't work, you try another thing. There's some limited progress in that front, but not much in terms of who will respond to what and how. Yeah, I think it's really could save money, and likewise, there have been two papers. Well, the second one hasn't. I think two have been published, maybe. But Elliot Marseille, who's a healthcare economist at UC San Francisco, has taken our phase 2 data and analyzed it, and his conclusion was, even with the model we have used in research, which is very intensive therapy up front and more expensive up front, it still would begin to save money after 3 years. So I think, doing, as you say, spending more money up front to do something actually very effective would save money in the long run. That's part of what we need to explore and help people understand.
And I think we're actively working on that goal. So we've already shown in healthy participants that basically the way your brain is working, without any substances on board, is associated with the way your brain reacts to a psychedelic. And we've seen that across different brain metrics. And I think that is, that doesn't tell us anything about clinical efficacy quite yet. But it tells us that there is something in your usual daily waking state that may have to do with how you react to a psychedelic. Now, the next step would then, of course, be, well, can we close the gap on whether how you react to the psychedelic, whether that has something to do with, whether or not you actually get better after psychedelic or MDMA-assisted therapy. So there are many gaps for sure at this point. But I think that doing this research, we may eventually be able to close these gaps and eventually maybe have an idea of, who may benefit, who may not benefit, whether MDMA is the correct or the most beneficial treatment versus psilocybin. Because as you say, these are expensive treatments. It's probably not the best to just go for trial and error, but not only about the money, right? These drugs are highly psychoactive, so I don't think you can underestimate what a patient is going through during these therapy sessions with these highly psychoactive drugs, and also what kind of despair they may be in if it doesn't work. Because the way we're talking about these substances these days is, well, these are the new magic bullets. Well, imagine being a patient who responds for a day or two and then goes back into depression. Well, then he failed the magic treatment. So that cannot be good. So we need to reconceptualize how we frame these therapies. I really think that understanding the mechanisms of action will help us to get there, and then hopefully eventually have a measure where we can at least have a likelihood to see whether this may be helpful or not in a patient, and in some ways maybe reduce suffering by offering an alternative treatment.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you talking about that, Katrin, because that's been a big concern of ours. Or, it's changed over the years. In the early studies, people didn't have a lot of expectation. In fact, it was sometimes hard for people to even think that this made any sense. But then, as there are more successful studies and more media, we've had people, say, "Well, I read in the paper that this is the kind of response you should have, and I didn't have that response. So what's wrong with me? So that is a big problem. They seem to be powerful tools, but they're not magic.
Yeah.
Katrin, I thought it would be nice just to micro focus on biomarkers, because I know quite a bit of your research has focused on that. I'm going to ask a silly question. Is that the same thing when we're talking about epigenetic changes? Is that the same kind of science where we're looking? Is it kind of the DNA structure and sequencing where biomarkers live? Can you just help me and maybe a few other people understand that piece?
Well, there are quite a few definitions, or let's say interpretations, of biomarkers out there. In general, a biomarker can be any biological, physiological measurement that is associated with, either predicting a treatment, monitoring a treatment, monitoring safety. So there are different classes of biomarkers, and epigenetics is one potential biomarker, and they can. We don't know exactly. We don't have a lot of studies on epigenetic changes with psychedelic or MDMA-assisted therapy quite yet. But of course, there is a lot of potential there, and maybe epigenetics will tell us something about treatment success, about predicting treatment success, about explaining the mechanism of action of MDMA or psychedelic assisted therapy. But we don't know yet. The same may be true for changes in brain connectivity, for example. But we're just not there yet to declare any of these measures a validated biomarker in any way, whether it's monitoring or predicting or safety for psychedelic or MDMA assisted therapy.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And another thought. Oh, Michael, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. When you're talking about epigenetics, I'm wondering, one of the fascinating questions to me is we consistently see improvements. We see improvement at 2 months, and then for most people, the improvement continues to grow, and people are doing even better at 1 year or later. So what's going on about that is an interesting question.
I'd love to talk about that, to be honest. And, we could bring in the neuroplasticity concept as well, and how to keep that neuroplastic window open for longer. We're looking at depression being treatment resistant and kind of coming back to the depression. How do we, stop that depression returning a little bit longer? Because, the treatment's expensive. And I know some people say, looking at the ketamine world there, do intermittently, say, IV ketamine with oral lozenge ketamine, and they space those out just to improve the neuroplastic window and be able to just afford it a little bit more easily. So I guess we're talking about route of administration potentially here. But also, what about integration? Like how are you both conceptualizing the efficacy, the optimization of integration, both from the neuropsychiatry perspective and from the more therapeutic perspective, what people can do at home and what they can do with their therapist?
Well, maybe can I jump in there real quickly, before we move on to the integration part, because you said something that I think we should discuss really briefly. So you're talking about the neuroplastic window. So I just want to mention that this is a really, really interesting concept, and this has been shown in animals. It has not been shown at all in humans at this point. So we have no idea whether that neuroplasticity translates into something at all in humans. And if it does, we have no idea whether that neuroplastic window is open for an hour during the acute administration, whether it's open for a day, a week. We have no idea whatsoever. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So if we're talking about these concepts, right, we need to understand them first before we try to optimize them. Because right now you're saying like, well, maybe, if we administer, we have a different dosing regimen, a different route of administration, maybe we can keep it open longer. Well, maybe we should try to find out whether it's open and when it's open first before we adjust these types of things. And the other thing that I want to mention, and this is, I think, linking back very strongly to Michael and where I think neurobiology or neuroscience can inform the therapeutic approach is, well, if indeed we have this window of plasticity, right? Increased plasticity alone doesn't do much. So you need to guide this window of plasticity with therapeutic approaches, because imagine you have a very plastic brain and then you are in a car accident. That could have terrible consequences, right? So we need to make sure that these people are protected during the time, and that the neuroplasticity is guided in a way that is eventually beneficial to these patients. And this is where the therapeutic approach can come in, and this is also where neuroscience can inform the therapeutic approach, because maybe if we figure out when this window of plasticity is actually open, we also know when the therapy will be most effective. And maybe we need to, instead of talking about increasing doses or changing routes of administration, we need to figure out when this window is open and then intensify the therapy during that window when it's open.
Very point, really well taken. I actually, I was saying to Guldolan the other day, I see a danger, because when I read some neuroscience that fits well with what we observe clinically, which is that the integration is really important, especially in the couple weeks afterwards. Then I read Gould's animal data that fits with that. So I glom onto that with excitement, maybe overlooking the fact that that's early animal data. As you say, our understanding of what's actually happening in humans is really limited. So I take your point. And your point about one of the dangers I see if these drugs are approved is thinking you need more drug, you need higher doses, you need it more often or whatever, instead of you need more integration.
Thank you for just owning your confirmation bias live on air,
Yes.
Michael. That was great. I think I have to own my my neuroplasticity hype as well, because it's honestly talked about as one of the key outcomes of psychedelic use. They're kind of shaking the snow globe kind of analogy. But yeah, you're saying, Katrin, it's actually not proven yet.
Well, I mean, shaking the snow globe and being in a neuroplastic state may mean the same thing, but it may also not, right? So I think that that's a really interesting metaphor. But we need to figure out what the neurocorrelate of that is, and whether that is, an intense experience and that is actually associated with, well, if we say neuroplasticity, functional neuroplasticity is usually uh, that we can learn more easily and that we can forget more easily, right? That in terms of functional plasticity. So it can just be a brief shaking the globe, but you haven't learned anything, right? So or forgotten anything really. So I think these things may not be exactly the same thing, and the biologic correlate of that is maybe something even different. So I think we just need to be careful also when we're explaining or when we're using metaphors to explain the effects of these drugs to people, that while we make it easy for people to understand, we still stay on the scientifically correct side of things, also to not raise expectations that we cannot meet.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And we've got a bit of time left. So maybe one big topic that we just mentioned was integration and how to approach that in your respective fields. So I think we could look at it from a behavioral, a social, clinical approaches, perhaps neurocognitive as well. What do you both sense we know so far around integration? There's not that much research on it, I know, but do you have any kind of underlying beliefs about what could be done with the average person during the integration stage, post-medicine, to improve outcomes? What's your sense? What do we know, and what do you would you like to know that we don't yet know?
Well, clinically speaking, we know that some people at the end, after an MDMA-assisted session, some people are feeling a lot better that evening, and they may be a lot of very difficult feelings and thoughts may be coming up the next day when we see them. Because I like your shaking the globe analogy. This really stirs things up, these sessions. And it's not, a number of people in our studies have said, I don't know why they call this ecstasy. Processing trauma is painful and challenging with or without any of these medicines. Maybe for many people, it appears to be possible with the medicine when it wasn't before, but that doesn't mean it's a cakewalk by any means. And we've had some people feel more suicidal afterwards. Maybe they feel it slipping away. They felt good for the first time in years and they feel it slipping away. Or maybe they, have gotten in touch with things that they've been keeping repressed for a long time. And so it can be actually dangerous afterwards, is what we observe clinically, if there's not proper support and human connection. But, we prepare people for the fact that you might, if you're agreeing to do this treatment, you need to know, in order to make an informed choice, you need to know that you may have more symptoms before you feel better. That's part of the process. You're, moving toward the trauma rather than suppressing the symptoms. Most psychiatric drugs are about suppressing symptoms, which can sometimes be important and helpful, but this is a different idea. Again, I have the luxury of speaking clinically and not having to really understand what this means on a neuroscience level, but that's the way we think of it, and that's what we observe clinically. So not only can it be important for safety, but then often people, even if they're not in danger, people will report more anxiety coming up in the days following. But they know they're prepared for that and they know to call us. And so inevitably, when that's coming up, if we help them look at it and make connections to what they were processing during the MDMA session, it becomes another step in their healing and in integrating the experience. Or how do I, now that I have seen these new ways of looking at things, how do I operationalize those in my life, in a way that actually works, that kind of thing. So I think these are not trivial experiences, and they can, kind of like Katrin says, if you shake the globe, it can have different outcomes depending on what happens next.
Yeah, and Katrin, over to you. I particularly would love to hear your thoughts around how that applies to addiction treatment. Folks that maybe they complete detox, maybe they've had some psychedelic sessions, and then what happens next? And that's where integration, I think, comes into aftercare. And having worked in addiction a lot, it's years and years of hard work once that trauma gets processed. And often it's because there's just not the kind of the social, relational infrastructure for people, maybe peer support groups, for example, or careers and homes and safe, reliable social networks. That's all integration, the way I see it, from an environmental perspective. So if it's okay just to ask you, particularly with addiction treatment, how potentially could this play out around the integration phase?
Yeah, so I really think that, independent of the indication really, but maybe especially for addiction, completely agreeing with Michael. So I think this is really, really, if not the most important part of the therapeutic process, because if people have made these psychedelic experiences, then of course we can't stop there, right? There is something that needs to change in the way patients perceive the world, in the way patients move forward, right? Especially with addiction. This is, I mean, relapse is more common than not relapsing. So of course this is a process, and I think the integration therapy, making sense of the experience, but also thinking about what can change in their life and how they can improve their life is just absolutely important. And I mean, this is part of any regular psychotherapy for these indications. But I think, as Michael said, if you have had this intense psychedelic experience, right, there is something that that was supported. It's supposed to support the therapeutic process. So you also need to do the therapeutic process, and that is usually what happens during the integration phase. So this is important, and I really think that here also we need to figure out. We don't really know what the best approach is. Is it different for depression than for alcohol use disorder, for example? Does one indication or one patient need more integration than another? Of course, in clinical trials, everything is very, very standardized. So I think also here, there's a lot we don't know yet. Again, we don't understand the mechanisms well enough to really inform the best way of doing it. So I think there are many, many open questions, and actually that gives me hope, because we see a lot of heterogeneity in the response to psychedelics. I mean, we've seen them basically across all trials published so far, that there are people who respond really well and they have a prolonged reaction, they get better for months and years. But also there is a significant part of the study population who doesn't, or who relapse really early after administration. And given that there are so many things that we don't know yet, that also means that there are so many things that we can potentially improve upon. And that's why I think understanding what we're doing and understanding the mechanisms is really important.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we're at time, and yeah, there's many more years of research to do, but this was beautiful just to tune into, where you're both holding. I wanted to ask a quick question if either of you have been to Israel or Tel Aviv before.
I've been to Israel, I think 6 or 7 times over the
Beautiful.
years.
And Tel Aviv Beach?
Yeah. The first time we went, a lot of bombings were still going on, and the hotels on the beach were half empty, but it's very beautiful.
I have not been, unfortunately, so far.
All right. Well, I'd love to see both of you. Hopefully in December.
Come back in December.
That would be awesome. All right. And just before we say goodbye, can you just tell folks that are listening, if they want to find out more about you and your work, where should they go?
Katrin?
Well, first of all, the University of Zurich has a web page that is basically publishing all the news coming out of the lab. I also have a Twitter, or now X, account where I try to share the latest news of the lab. And other than that, just always feel free to write an email.
And for me, I'm either maps.org, maps.org, or Maps Public Benefit Corp.com, I guess it is. And also, if people want to follow the MAPS research, they can go on the MAPS website and sign up for the free newsletter that will keep them informed. And my email is michael@mapsbcorp.com. So, and you could even join MAPS as a supporter if you wanted to.
Awesome. Thank you. This is really fun. Yeah.
I can say I just want to wish you safety and peace, and we hope we'll see you in December.
Same here.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, one day at a time, it really is. Please God, thank you for that. All right, well, yeah, I really hope we meet in person, but for now, it's been wonderful meeting online. So thank you very much, both of you, Katrin and Michael. God bless.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you, David. Thank you.